Yeah, definitely. So I think in terms of why it's important to know who your stakeholders are, I think one of the big things is, for me, I think consultation is really important. So I think when you're designing, particularly with, say, things like ASEAN, where you're designing programs or projects, knowing who it is that's going to benefit from your program or project and being able to get their input is really important. So I think it's very important for consultation, because without that, I don't think that it's possible to make a project or a program that's really meaningful for the people that you're going to deliver it to, because they're best placed to know what that is and what that should look like. But also, I think in terms of stakeholder management, when you're looking at different stakeholders that perhaps are working in the area that you want to work in, or that are working on projects similar to the things that you're working on, I think it's important for two reasons. One, I think if you consult with them, there's things that they may have learnt along the way that can help you. And in terms of that knowledge sharing, I think that's really valuable. But also, I think because as a youth organisation, we don't want to invent the wheel every time. And so learning from what other people have done is really important. But on top of that, I think engaging with stakeholders shows people that you really care about their input. And that really goes a long way to building relationships. And I think the only reason, or not the only reason, but one of the reasons that ASEAN has gotten so far in such a short amount of time is because we've really made an effort to build on those relationships with those key stakeholders, which means that we've been able to learn from them and then take their knowledge and add it to what we're doing, so that we can create something really beneficial and really meaningful. So I think that's why it's important. I think understanding what the field is and understanding how you can find your way or your place in that field to make the biggest amount of impact. Not very often that it's a very clear process. I think you can often start with an idea that you think you know everyone working in the field, you think you know all these different things, but when you start to work, either your project might adapt or change a little bit, and in that way your stakeholders might grow. You might have new stakeholders that you need to talk to or involve, or your stakeholders might change. So someone who you thought was really going to be a big person to be involved might then not end up being as involved as you thought, and you might, end up drawing from someone else. So, for example, with the Break the Chain project, so our modern slavery project with ASEAN, we started off consultation with a lot of, NGOs that were working in the space, or people who are working directly with victims of modern slavery and human trafficking. But as we've kind of gone on that process of consultation, or as the team has gone on that process, I think we've really realised the importance of dealing with, say, businesses that are working in that space, and how people who aren't necessarily directly involved in modern slavery and human trafficking can actually make a huge impact on the way that we deliver our program, because they have a unique perspective that we hadn't really considered before. So I do think that it sometimes takes a bit of digging, but I think it's very, very helpful at the beginning of a project, and really important at the beginning of a project, to sit down and try to map out and figure out who all of the key stakeholders are. But keep in mind that that might change as the project goes along. As to why it's important, I really think that it's important for getting diverse perspectives, but also I think it's important because if you want to involve yourself in a particular field, you also want to know who those other players are and what they're doing, because you may or may not want to be in competition with those people, or you may or may not want to do something similar to what another person's doing. And in that way, it's really important to know what's been done before, what's currently happening, and how can you best contribute to that space, so that you aren't recreating things that other people are also doing, or you aren't kind of encroaching on work that other people are doing and doing it twice. But then that way you can really kind of make an impact in a way that's meaningful. In terms of who would be the most important to reach out to and how you can prioritize, I think it would depend on what your agenda is, or what you are trying to achieve out of engaging with those stakeholders. So for example, if your goal is to learn from stakeholders and to gain knowledge from stakeholders, I guess looking at a couple of things. Sometimes looking at the structure of the organization and looking at who you might be able to get meaningful access to. So as a young person, sometimes you want to go for like the most established, biggest organization, but perhaps those organizations can't give you the time or the insights that you want. And so it might be better or more impactful for you to kind of look at stakeholders that are less established but have very experienced people in them, and that way you can actually get that information that you need. So I guess in terms of like figuring out which ones to prioritize or which one's the most important, first thing would be to figure out what is the ask. So whenever you go into talking with a stakeholder, you want to figure out what is the clear ask, and what is it that you're trying to gain from that stakeholder. And so that is something that's really, really important to know, because that will allow you to prioritize who can best meet that need. And also it can guide conversations. So although I don't think that you should necessarily go into a stakeholder meeting with one ask in mind and really focus on that, because stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management is all about relationships. So building those relationships is really important. But I do think that having a clear ask will add structure to how you manage that relationship and which ones you engage with when. So let's say if you're designing a project, so I'll go back to Break the Chain, our modern slavery project. If you want to say get funding, before you get funding, you have to have a program to be able to sell to people. So in that way, the stakeholders that you're engaging with first are people that you're asking for knowledge from or asking for advice or guidance. And those are stakeholders that you can build those relationships with before you engage with stakeholders that might be able to give you funding opportunities or facilitate funding, and that will come after. So in that case, knowing what your ask is and how you can kind of like follow those asks on that journey is really important.
One thing that I noted from what you just said is that the first thing that we need to do, basically, having to know what's the need, having to know the kind of people that we want to engage or the kind of stakeholders that we want to engage. You mentioned first that who's the person that we know and who's doing some research afterward. In terms of youth, not necessarily saying that youth is more at disadvantage compared to, say, big company or more established organization, but because Spark is, we aspire to help people who might want to start and they might not know where to start and how to start. What do you think works best that you've seen? Or does it need, I know this person, then I will contact them because I know they fulfill? Or if we don't have anyone that we know of that might help us, what do you think they should do to sort of meet that needs and meet that kind of person that they need?
Yeah, so I think in terms of where to start, so I think if you have people that know someone, great, use those connections, because that's very, very helpful.
Right.
If you've got your list of stakeholders and you can be like, okay, well, I know someone who knows that person, see if you can get into contact, because as someone said to me the other day, like, a warm lead is always better than a cold lead. And that means that having a personal connection or someone who can introduce you to that person is always better than having a lead from nowhere where you randomly message them on LinkedIn, for example. Right. But in terms of if you don't know anyone, I think two things. First thing is there's nothing ventured, nothing gained. So that means that, like, if you don't try to reach out to someone, you'll never know. So definitely, I think there's a lot to be said for actually taking the leap and contacting people, sending them an email, sending them a message on LinkedIn, and seeing whether they respond. But I do also think that when you are looking at your stakeholders, all of your stakeholders, especially as a youth organization, all of your stakeholders don't have to be like very, very high level stakeholders. In fact, in my experience, some of the best stakeholders that have given the most to projects that I've been involved in have been people who are really, really experienced and are able to give some time to you to kind of work things through. So I think when you're looking, I guess I look at it on a matrix. So you've got what is going to take a lot of resources to get involved, or what is going to take a lot of skills or a lot of kind of time to manage that stakeholder relationship, and what do we realistically think that stakeholder can give us. Right? So if you think about it on like a continuum, you have this person's going to take a lot of time and effort, or this stakeholder, organization, business is going to take a lot of time and effort to get in contact with and also to manage. And then we're going to have to be really proactive in, I guess, putting a lot of resources into that. And then saying, okay, well, what we think they can give us is good, but like, where does that sit in terms of reward for that? So, okay, well, like, it's going to take a lot of resources, but if we get in contact with them and they can provide us with that ask or that thing that we need, that's going to be really high reward. And that means that, okay, perhaps that person is really someone that we want to put that time and effort into getting in touch with and getting involved. There's other stakeholders that might be easier to get in contact with. It might be as easy as getting in contact with another youth organization through WhatsApp. That's fine too. And they also might have high reward. They also might have a lot that they can tell you or share with you. Or they might have less that they can share with you, or less of, not less that they can share with you, because I think everyone has things they can share with you, but the ask might not be as high. And so if you can map them out on this like continuum, you can kind of see, okay, which ones are going to take the least amount of resources and give the highest return. And that's a great way to kind of prioritize where you can start. So not to say that that's the only ones you should engage with, because you can engage with as many stakeholders as you have capacity for, but that's a great way to start. And once you have some people on board, often it can be a bit of a snowball effect where you get a couple of stakeholders on board and start with those few and then really invest in those relationships. And all of those people that you've spent time building on that relationship with, they can introduce you to all of the other people that they know, and then it becomes a snowball. So looking at where they sit in terms of how hard it is to get in contact with them and how much they can give you, and then working it that way.
Right. I think it's very beneficial to think about it like the cost and rewards that they can give, and that would help you put the priorities. Oh, we should get in contact with this person first, and maybe later on with this person, depends on that need. I think that's a very good tool for young people, especially when they feel like they're lost and how to get things started. And I think that could be provide the clarity on how to approach that.
Yeah, so an example might be like, you might want to get in touch with a government organization, and you say, okay, I want to get in touch with the Australian government, and they can give me, say, funding, but the amount of time and effort and resources to get that funding or to put those funding applications in is high resource, but it's high reward as well if you get that ask. Other things could be like, okay, well, I'm really looking to, build a community of people who will help me make this project really successful. And that might be less resources and say, not less raw, but like different. And so you can kind of look at who feels what need and how, and you can put it into a bit of an idea.
Right. That's amazing. That's a very amazing and reassuring, I guess, for young people to know and to hear that there's a way it can be done, and it is a daunting task, but there's nothing to be afraid of. Just do it with the way that you structure it. Listen first, assess them, and then put them in those metrics. Then just get started, I guess.
One of the things that I think is really interesting to keep aware of when working with people from across all different areas, particularly across the region in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia. So as an Australian, a lot of my friends don't use like WhatsApp, for example. So like the way that we engage with stakeholders is almost always through a formal email. But I guess different organizations or different cultures have different ways of doing things. And so say in Indonesia, I'm sure you could probably know better than me, but like WhatsApp is a very common way to do business or to like talk to stakeholders, and that's okay. Or different kind of Instagram, even like different ways of communicating. And so I think when you're looking at stakeholders and you're trying to think about who is in the space, really be aware of how you're engaging with people and how you might be able to ask for advice as to how best to talk to stakeholders in that particular place that you're going to be engaging with people. So at ASEAN, I know that we're lucky enough to have volunteers across Southeast Asia, which is great because I'm not an expert, say, in engaging with people in Vietnam, because I've never been to Vietnam. So talking to people who are in Vietnam to say, who do you think the stakeholders might be in your own country? Because they're best placed to know that. So really finding the connections that you have in your networks and seeing who might be able to advise you, I think is potentially the most important skill in stakeholder mapping, because again, those people are best placed to know who those stakeholders are. But I think that in terms of finding which stakeholders are in a particular country, research goes a long way.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I guess we cover everything that we need for you and thank you for doing this as the youth expert for this Spark module. Yeah, I guess it's important to have youth, especially after doing this myself. And then, it's definitely because as a youth, we speak the same language. So it's easier to understand when we are doing the same thing. We're in the same kind of walk of life at the moment. And then we have a transition, and then it's easier I hope that it's easier for people as well to understand from the youth perspective that this is something that could be done instead of only looking at a high level kind of explanation.
Yeah.